I cannot hear you. If you can hear me, I cannot hear you.
CPSD is pleased to bring you yet another thought provoking and enthralling webinar focused on China's rise and its impact in South Asia and the international arena. Over the last 2 decades, China has regained much of its influence in the world, as Beijing is making progress towards its dream of restoring what it sees as its rightful great power status through the mechanisms of global governance. The primary goal of global governance
Now, this system is creating issues in terms of the political and economic relations of the countries with these two great powers. Uh, the Europe, traditionally, the Western Europe has been in the US camp, but today, in 21st century, their economies are very much dependent on China. European Union's biggest trading partner is China. US and China themselves are the two biggest trading partners. Japan and South Korea, which are known US allies in the East Asia, they are the two top exporters into China. So these dynamics have created certain complex uh, situations in terms of politics and economics. Similarly, in South Asia, United States has recently exited from its 20-year-old war in Afghanistan. However, the US presence, US interests are still there in the region in one way or the other. China, because of its CPEC in Pakistan and China's near frontiers in South Asia, China is growing in its influence. And this is going to create a difficult situation for Pakistan. So what we are going to do today is to discuss the impact of this rivalry on the global governance and certainly see what are the challenges there for Pakistan in it and how we may be able to handle it. So before we get on to the discussion, let me introduce the uh, panel we have today. First of all, Air Marshal Shahid Akhtar Alvi, retired, Hilal Imtiaz Military. Very welcome, sir. Air Marshal Shahid Akhtar Alvi is the Deputy President of Center for Aerospace and Security Study, Lahore chapter. Uh, he had a meritorious career in Pakistan Air Force, a fighter pilot, has been to important command and staff appointments in Air Force. Prior to his retirement, he was the Deputy Chief of Air Staff Training in Pakistan Air Force. He's a very regular contributor in various publications. Second, we have Dr. Talat Shabir with us. Dr. Talat Shabir is also ex-military, and now he's, mashallah, PhD doctor who specializes on China-Pakistan relations. He's currently director of China-Pakistan Study Center at the Strategic Studies Institute of Islamabad. He's author of Creating Shared Futures on Pakistan-China Relations and has also edited a book called 7 Decades of Pak-China Partnership. He's a very well-known analyst and strategic academic in the Islamabad. And we are also proud to have Dr. Shabana Fayaz, a very well-renowned academic, author, and analyst in the strategic field. Dr. Shabana has authored a book about Pakistan's response to the terrorism. She has a very long list of publications, especially in the international journals, and she specializes in security, extremism, and militancy. So with this brief introduction, I welcome you all, the gentleman and the lady. I'm going to start this webinar with Dr. Talat Shabir. And sir, we would request you to share your views on the subject of the growing role of China in global governance and how far and in which systems you feel that China's impact is going to be there in the global governance. Dr. Talat Shabir.
Sir, thank you very much for a very generous introduction. And it's really honor for me to be part of CPST seminar series. And I think this topic is very timely and very relevant in today's geopolitics. When we talk of growing China and global governance, so there's a debate going on for the last 20 years, last 2 decades, that China is rising. Is China's rise peaceful, or it's not very peaceful? So I think the way China is growing, or the phrases or the things coming from the Chinese leadership are very positive. Like they talk of creating shared future, they talk of common destiny, they talk of sharing excess wealth, and they talk of nice things, which were not talked of before by any emerging or superpower. So it's also time to really critically see as to when China grows, what specific role it will have in the global governance. And of course, the topic is very relevant when we talk of global governance. We see that China has a system which is actually driven by communist ideals. And how can that communist ideals fit into this market economy that drives today's world? So it's very interesting for China when we talk of rising China. So many scholars on China say that China has risen to this position because China made adjustments to its system, particularly economic system. And China actually became flexible in trying to adjust to what is happening in the world and how can they create a kind of system whereby they can dovetail their economic structure with the countries those who are following market economy. In last 2 decades, it's very important, post 9/11 specifically, China has emerged as a major power. It has become world's second largest economy. It has become a world-class military in advancement, and of course in the field of technology. And it has started asserting its economic prowess. When we talk, these are very important things when we talk of gaining centrality in the international system, which of course is run through global economic institutions, global financial institutions. China has actually adjusted to we had a Bretton Woods system by which we have in the World Bank, IMF, and other various United Nations organizations, financial institutions. So China not only is trying to create a kind of their own institutions, but they are also of the view that existing international financial institutions can be used in a manner that they are just and fair in dealing with the entire world, particularly developing countries. China is at the moment pursuing a multi-pronged strategy towards global governance. It supports international institutions and agreements that they have done with the international institutions. It also aligns with the norms and goals of the international institutions, such as World Bank and Paris Agreement on climate change. So China is quite flexible on the way the international institutions should look like. But of course, China asserts that it should be fair and just system dealing with the developing world. In past few years, for instance, when COVID erupted in China, we saw that there was some kind of influence that China was trying to assert on WHO, or it is, some Western countries also objected to what WHO is actually doing. So there we saw that it began to assert its viewpoint on various international institutions. Now, the example you heard in the video clip run by the organizers, we know that out of 15 principal agencies of United Nations, 4 are headed by China. And when you come down to the details, you would know that they're into communication, telecommunication, and industrial development, food and agriculture, international civil aviation organizations. These are the 4 organizations that China is heading. So you can also see their preferences and priorities when it comes to heading international institutions. Of course, China, many other institutions, like 9 of these 15 agencies, also have deputies from Chinese origin. The most important thing that when we talk of global governance or international system, there's a donor system in international organizations, and China has also increased its funding to United Nations, which was 190 million in 2010, and it has risen to 1.6 billion in 2019. You can see the quantum of increase in the donation that China has started to give to United Nations or international bodies. Then China is increasingly trying to capture internet governance, and China works with powers like Russia to create standards that reflect their interests. So they are trying to, in the internet domain, they are also challenging the authority that probably America or the allies, Western allies, exercise for a long time. There are three big ways that China is trying to assert in international governance system. First is China has tried to take bigger role in international institutions. So as I said, Chinese are very flexible on multilateralism, multilateral institutions. So they are trying to assume bigger role in international institutions. They also laid groundwork to create some of the own organizations or institutions or arrangements. For instance, when you look at Belt and Road Initiative, it's an arrangement that China has made in order to have influence in countries. So far, when we say that practically about 70 odd countries have joined hands with China on Belt and Road Initiative. Now, this is an arrangement that China is trying to create own organizations. For example, Belt and Road Initiative is China's own arrangement, and which has also created a ripple in the world, because I think Belt and Road Initiative will fetch China the influence it requires to govern the world. Sometimes, third way is also described by various critiques of China, that China has started subverting certain global governance rules. For instance, the example of WHO is also quoted in this regard, when they say that China has tried to manipulate some of the rules that WHO for global governance. Xi Jinping is very forthcoming, and the system that the world is trying to, the system that Chinese are trying to create in the world, they say it should be based on fairness and justice. And the term fairness and justice signals a call for major multipolar world, one potentially with smaller US role in setting international rules. This is very fairness and justice is the principle that I already quoted, that China thinks that there are certain international institutions which are very coercive in their working, very coercive in their policies towards developing world, which is not fair and which is highly unjust. When we talk of regional integration arrangements, for example, SEO. So China has tried to create a kind of arrangement where China could also assert influence in the regional arrangements. And SEO is, a success story so far, though there are problems in SEO because it comprises various countries who do not put up well with each other. But still, from Chinese point of view, this is a good and successful arrangement. The important thing is when we talk of global governance is it funds infrastructure. So Belt and Road Initiative is a very, very fine fund infrastructure that actually would be creating a kind of infrastructure for funding developing world. If you look at the argument, which is for instance, people say that America still is on with the policy of containment of China. But if you look at Chinese influence that goes into our 70 countries, and 70 countries where Chinese are actually taking their infrastructure also into those countries. So I in my assessment, in wherever China goes with the infrastructure, its influence also goes in that country. So 70 countries, if we practically speak, 70 countries now have Chinese influence. So the very logic of containing China becomes questionable when we see China's influence growing in the countries where China has infrastructure as well as investment in various other ventures. It's my own assessment that whenever a country becomes richer, its its policies towards countries change. So, but China so far has been very benevolent in their outlook. They whatever they say, like the public statements, the policy statements coming from Chinese leadership, usually said that they're looking for a world, nicer world, benevolent world, a world where we have a common future, we have a common destiny, the win-win situation. So all these things, phrases are very good for the world where we need a world where all developed world is helping the developing countries, and people are dealt with justice and fairness. But I think when you take that kind of power, you become that kind of economic power. You have some way to assert your strategic prowess as well. So I think for next 50 years that China is actually concentrating on building their economy. Chinese will continue to have this benevolent thought process in their leadership, and their leadership will continue to stress on having shared future. And but when they are over with their economic issues, and then another story will start. And I think that is very premature to comment on that. World should take advantage of what China is doing for the world. The developing world should also take advantage of the excess wealth China has. We should, like Pakistan, should also take advantage of technological advancements that China has attained, and we must focus on economic development. And that is how China's global outlook will also benefit developing countries, and Pakistan is there to benefit from it. I think it's very important to adjust to the China's growing global infrastructure, governance infrastructure. If they are thinking of creating a global infrastructure which is helping developing world to improve their lives of the people. So I think this is going to be. Last comment I would like to make is about system. There's a lot of debate going on system. For instance, this year was 100 years. The Chinese Communist Party completed 100 years. So Chinese Communist Party has given a system to China whereby they have done in 40 years what maybe democracies have not achieved in. So they have proved on ground that CPC has actually done wonders to change lives of their people. 770 million people getting out of poverty, and announcing that in China there's no absolute poverty is a claim that in the world's history no leader could make. Xi Jinping has made this claim, and I think China is one country which could make this claim. And how have they attained? They have attained through this system. So I don't approve, I don't stress that the whole world should go on the system that China is following. You can make changes in your own systems, whichever system suits you. But I think China is also not stressing on world to actually get into their fold, get into their system to have economic cooperation. And I think the system that China looks at for global governance is a system suiting to the countries in accordance with their own aspirations. So if China gets into global governance, I don't think so there's any country who has any danger from China to stressing on adopting their system to get cooperation from China. Thank you very much, and we can have some discussion in answer question. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Talal Shabir. A very comprehensive and a short overview of China's emerging role or growing role in the global governance. Taking cue from Dr. Shabir's last comment about China's advocacy about their own system, that single party communist style rule, completing 100 years and proving to the world that they have been very successful. It reminds me of a very interesting event which happened in April this year. While addressing on the 98th day of taking over, President Joe Biden addressing the Congress, he said that when his Secretary Blinken was in China on some official visit, he was met multiple times in those 2 days by the Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, the president of China. And he said, Joe Biden addressing the Congress said that a point was made on the American envoy that Chinese system is most efficient for 21st century and United States must consider this issue. So taking this cue from Dr. Shabir's last comment, this will be discussed further in our webinar. So going further, our next speaker is Air Marshal Shahid Alvi, and he will be, sir, your comments are needed on US-China competition and how it is shaping and in which spheres of global economics, politics, governance, and security. So over to Air Marshal Shahid Alvi.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, Ishan, for providing an opportunity to be part of such an enlightening discussion on a subject like this, and listening to these two scholars with such a high repute and knowledge. To start with, I wish, like US Department of Defense report with clear objectives, China makes similar report to make the job easier for the people like us. Anyhow, reasonable judgments can always be made based on behavioral pattern and some policy statements by the officials. My topic deals with the mutual rivalry, and in doing so, I will make an attempt to focus more on different dimensions of conflict and ensuing effect on the world, and restrict the temptation of presenting stats that can prove the might of these two superpowers, in particularly rising. Can you hear me?
Sir, your voice is a bit distorted. If you can use the hands-free. You're on the mic of the computer. If you can plug in your headphones or hands-free.
Can you hear me better now?
No, sir. Your sound is not
still
clear.
The same? It's still not clear.
सर अगर माइक को थोड़ा आप करीब कर लें अपने.
I think mic is embedded in the camera, so perhaps उसको तो पास लाना शायद possible नहीं होगा.
दरअसल वो there is a lot of echo coming because you are a little away from the mic.
Yes, I'm just maybe a feet from the mic, but you're feeling the echo. Although I tested this on a Zoom meeting with someone a short while ago, it was going perfectly.
What we can do, sir, we can start with Dr. Shabana. And in the meanwhile, if you can please adjust the mic. Or
let me see. Okay, let me see how can I do that.
Right, right. So we proceed further, and our next speaker is Dr. Shabana Fayaz. I have introduced her to the audience. Dr. Shabana, what we are requesting you to comment on is the challenges and opportunities for Pakistan. So although that should have come after the US-China competition and its impact in South Asia. However, knowing that this subject is very clear to you and you are the expert on the subject, so if you can just, with brief introduction to this competition, you can put us wise on the challenges and opportunities for Pakistan emerging out of this rivalry.
To begin with, Zishan Saab, it's a wonderful opportunity to be a part of CPST webinar series.
Thank you.
And this is my first time with the think tank, and hopefully we'll have many more in future.
Inshallah.
The topic is very interesting, as we all know, and Pakistan and China's relations are a talk not only within Pakistan, across the world as well. Challenges and opportunities, I really feel that one cannot bifurcate challenges from the opportunities, because in fact they are intertwined. What we see as an opportunity has a challenge embedded in it. So to begin with, let's take an example of just like Dr. Talib Shabir has very wisely pointed out, the BRI infrastructure. Another part of the component of BRI is the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So economic corridor, to institute it, we are in the second phase and going forward into third phase, inshallah. It is a whole new infrastructure of the roads and rail networks, and also the uplifting of the Gwadar port, seaport, and also many other berths in Pakistan. So why we are doing all this? For people, for the analyst, at the very beginning, it may seem that it is a 1 day or a 1 year job. This is not. It is, in fact, is an opportunity that is based on the long-term geo-economic vision of China, coupled with the Pakistan's perception of its future going forward. So this is what we are looking at. It is a mixture of geoeconomics and geostrategic imperatives. Why I call it an imperative, specifically the strategic imperatives, is because if you have a good economy, you are better placed to deal with your strategic challenges as well. And the strategic challenges themselves create the opportunities for the contenders. Pakistan being a part of CPEC and also a long-time friend of the China, let's take an example of Gwadar. I myself have visited Gwadar. It is a wonderful place. The port has been set up by Chinese, but there are a lot of issues. People living in Gwadar, they are having it, and Chinese are investing into that. They have opened the Technical and Vocational Institute, contributing to the uplift of human development of the Balochistan people, so that the misperception of or the propaganda fed by the anti-Pakistan elements should be sided away. Now, what Pakistan has a challenge, as a state has a challenge to do, this is just one example, is to ensure the safety and security of the Chinese personnel who are here for business, whether related to CPEC or other business ventures in Pakistan. We all remember the Dasu incident that has happened, and a series of incidents has recently happened. Even in Karachi, the Chinese consulate was targeted. Simple question is it the homework of the Pakistani element? The story tells the other way. There are many, many outside forces who are hostile to both Chinese interest in South Asia and elsewhere, and also against Pakistan. So this has to be viewed in a larger game as well, that the Pakistan's not alliance getting closer economically linked to Chinese projects is seen as a threat by the forces who are not comfortable with the rise of China, number one, and with the economic prosperity of Pakistan. Plus, coupled with it is the stability, domestic stability of Pakistan. The more turbulent the zone is, the better it is for them. Now, I will link this with what is happening in Afghanistan or has happened in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has remained a very unstable zone. And what Chinese and Pakistan's and all the friends of Afghanistan want is an inclusive and a peaceful settlement in Afghanistan. It is not only for economic reason, it is for human development reason as well. South Asia is home to a major chunk of world population. And we have a successful story, just like narrated, of lifting the people from poverty from the Chinese example. So this is something how we can learn from this part and translate into this. And then important economic, I think, challenge for Pakistan is CPEC has unfolded the special economic zones for Pakistan. We are doing that, but we need to do more. How we can do it? We don't have a trained people to be used and produce the infrastructure material or raw material needed by China to be exported outside Pakistan. So transit, to be a successful transit zone, Pakistan needs the technical education, Pakistan needs an infrastructure, Pakistan needs a commitment, and Pakistan needs a support system that is also corruption free. So this is very, very important that we need. Now, another important aspect is about the very perception of Chinese in Pakistan. We are living in an interconnected world. If you see all the Western engines that we are using, nothing bad about it, but we have to understand what some mediums are propagating. The Chinese relations with the other ethnicities, other religious communities should not be viewed as or propagated as negatively in Pakistan. We should always be careful of the misinformation traits that happen or the trends happen on live in the Western mediums. The different names have been used, and Pakistani citizens, especially the youth and the vulnerable segments of the society, they should be very, very closely monitored and not to be misguided by that, because this in fact will fuel the negativism not only against China or other communities living within Pakistan. Coming to the last point, I will say is that challenges for Pakistan is another is to have more of a people-to-people contact with China. I've just been told by Dr. Talat Shabir, who really heads the China Center at a very important institute in Islamabad, that very vibrant relationship has been building up. In myself being a part of Quaid-e-Azam University, I must say even my work has been appreciated by the professor from China, and they're willing to, and they're going ahead with the project to translate my book into Chinese language. So this is something we need more. Our university has done the MOUs, but there has to be a persistence. There has to be a commitment long term. There is a language barrier. We have at our department introduced the Mandarin language to be taught as a compulsory subject to our bachelor students. Why? Because we really feel as an academia, as an analyst, as a part of civil society, as we have embraced McDonald's, English, and all the languages, we should be prepared to have our young generation trained as the global citizens, where China remains a reality and will remain a reality. And our job is not to choose Pakistan, China versus Pakistan, US. I think Pakistan is well poised to be a bridge between the different nations and cultures. The way we brought Kissinger to China, why can't Pakistan be a land of peace, a land of prosperity and economic cooperation, and a bridge benefiting from China, learning from West and moving forward? I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabana. As usual, expectations were high and you have been very, very accurate in your expression. You have almost touched all the aspects of the challenges and opportunities, the environment which is there in Pakistan, and what are the imperatives in this subject. So, sir,
Can you hear me now?
Sir, now we come towards you, and we would like your comments on the competition between United States and China, and how is it going to shape the world of 21st century, sir?
Okay, पहले तो आवाज को we can sort out. Can you hear me now, or should I do?
Sir, you are audible, sir. It's okay.
Okay, that's great. It's quite a relief. Okay, thank you very much, Vidya Vishan, for providing an opportunity to be part of such an enlightening discussion on a subject like this, and listening to these two scholars with such high repute and knowledge. To start with, I wish the US Department of Defense report with clear objectives And China should also make similar report to make jobs easier for the people like us. Anyhow, reasonable judgments can always be made based on behavioral pattern and some policy statements by the official. Since my topic deals with a mutual rivalry between these two superpowers, so in doing so, I will attempt to focus more on the different dimension of conflict and ensuing effect on the world, and restrict the temptation of presenting statistics that prove the might of these two powers, especially the rising China. They are well known. It is a fact, without taking any sides, that China has been promoting peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation with the United States without obviously compromising on her core interest. Even in the face of provocative US statements and action during President Trump earlier year, China maintained significant engagement. However, a visible change occurred when President Trump declared China as an enemy, and therefore we see China, perhaps for the first time in history, begin mirror imaging America's economic pressure toolkit and developed strict laws and regulation and slapped sanctions on American personnel and pointedly criticized the performance of Western democracies. In my opinion, which is also based on personal interaction with both the sides, the real threat that the West or US senses lie in ideological domain. And China is at the verge of proving that liberal order and democracy, the lifeline of West, is not the only model, but on the contrary, the Western model has failed on so many accounts to meet the aspiration of people and break and the ever-growing class difference. West thus fears that the moment worlds start to lose trust on their brand of capitalism and free market economy, there will be question mark on their whole philosophy of governance and resultant rule of Chinese model regimes in many parts of the world. Well, moving beyond the ideological debate, when we look at the relative strength of US and China, it leads towards a fair assumption that their rivalry would not reach, at least in foreseeable future, to an existential level. And there is a reason for this. When you start to perceive enemy having niche, closely guarded capabilities, it diminishes your will for a kill. The unique trait that make these two powers formidable lies in highly competitive innovation ecosystems that have enabled them to develop lethal military weapons. China is therefore perceived by the world as the only power that can seriously harm USA in conventional military conflict, a status that was not even accorded to the USSR at the peak of her power. Therefore, riding on such power potential, China naturally feels that it cannot be a true global power if it remains surrounded by US allies and security partners. And I think this is a pertinent lesson from the US history as well, when US secured Caribbean from the European influence before dominating the entire globe. But what if China has an alternate plan? That instead of focusing on regional control, because that may lead towards limited military conflict, it should instead consider on global domination, riding on the shoulder of economic worldwide access and reliable and advanced AI solution. In this approach, it would instead put increasing emphasis on shaping the world's economic rule and technology standard to its advantage. Even if China shows flexibility in South China Sea, still Washington needs to understand that while some countries such as Australia, Japan, and India are open to deeper, open strategic alignment with the US in the context of their overall relationship with China, others in the region simply cannot do so and will not do so. And this is not just a matter of political will, but in many cases of perceived economic necessity. And this intensifying competition between the US and China also poses challenges for regional stability in South Asia, where India is over-militarized to an extent where it can opt to engage in a conflict across contested boundaries beside escalating nuclear arms race. Their rivalry would also adversely impact stabilization goal in Afghanistan and beyond. The signing of basic exchange and cooperation agreement between the United States and India and the growing military-to-military relations between China and Pakistan signify a growing split in South Asia in what we call a strategic chain, whereby Pakistan responds strategically to India India responds both to Pakistan and China in turn responds to both India and the US. Two-front mantra by India allows its cherry picking in the world's open market. The respective leaning of two global parts towards two regional parts in South Asia are indicators of accelerating bipolar blocks in the region. At the time when US President Donald Trump was disrupting the international institutional order, which he thought has enabled China to thrive, Beijing was sensing an opportunity and thus projected itself as a country with greater ability to shape rules, norms, and institutions towards its preference. The dominance of global institutions by these two big powers is thus an ongoing process, which has intensified in the last 20 years, as sufficiently covered by Dr. Farad. I would say that governing world institution is considered a true manifestation of superpower status, as while on one side, they play a decisive role in interstate affairs leading towards economic cooperation and multilateralism. But on the other hand, they're also used as punishing tool on a fairly regular basis. West, knowing the past that how they manipulated these institutions, feared that China seeks to shape the global governance system to advance its model of political and economic development. This rivalry sometimes obstructs vital decision-making process in the UN, and in the future, this divide could make it even harder for states to collaboratively address major international challenges. The divide, if not controlled, could even create too diverse system of global governance for which US would share the major blame. Because so far the efforts made by China to complement the BRI through the current global governance regimes and compliance with the international commitments have been acknowledged and accorded her credibility. Within this focus on great power competition, two broader trends in the US-China relationships have commanded relatively less attention, which has, I think, the potential bearing on the world, has been the widening gap in America's and China's overall national power relative to any other country in the world. Collectively, they are set to capture 70% of the $16 trillion windfall that artificial intelligence is expected to add to the global economy by 2030. The second has been a continuing thick interdependence between the United States and China, despite their growing rivalry. Such interdependence never existed between USSR and USA. Therefore, it is logical to assume that the fear of mutually assured recession should prevent either the US or China from adopting a damaging course. Based on this reality, it would not be off the mark to assess that the US policy focus for the foreseeable future would not be seeking a collapsed China or its Communist Party. Rather, it will be on strengthening America's long-term competitiveness vis-a-vis China. Hence, the most likely scenario for world order in foreseeable future would not be much different than ongoing economic globalization led by two states that would persistently benefit from this status quo. To conclude, I would say that President Joe Biden is likely to use the challenges posed by China as a spur for his domestic resilience agenda, and being a seasoned and pragmatic politician, he would resist limiting his own flexibility by painting the world with permanent black and white dividing lines. The rivalry between two is less driven by economic realities and more by great power rivalry and nationalism. At the moment, it is painful for the Americans to think and behave as equal to the citizen of some other country. They have never experienced it in their lifetime, but they will have to learn to live with this or risk mutual fall. As the dense wedge formed by trade, financial, scientific, and academic links between the United States and China will make it difficult for one side to inflict harm on other without hurting itself in the process. They understand that the fall of either would bring the world economy to standstill and a steep fall in their living standards. USA would then cease to be a preferred destination for the world. For advanced nations, choosing side is not a security compulsion as it was in post-World War II. Most of them have decided to retain a degree of neutrality. The dilemma lies with financially weak states that find it increasingly difficult to resist the pull. Hence, the option for Pakistan in the given situation are delicate. And without political and internal stability, A firm course of action in line with our national security objective would be a challenging task. Pakistani policymakers should adopt a cautious approach in managing bilateral relations with both strategically vital countries and not be swayed in openly taking sides. Calibrated policy statements based on reality and without emotional overtone should be adopted by those who are allowed to make public statements. In the absence of existing political will within the US to significantly expand bilateral relations with Pakistan, the onus will rest on Pakistani policymakers to identify feasible opportunities for bilateral cooperation with the US in tandem with strategic partnership with China. Meanwhile, Pakistan can also create an enabling regulatory environment to facilitate international and US-based firms to invest in Pakistani infrastructure and be part of CPEC. Pakistan, like earlier said, might again play the bridging role if the events appear to spiral out of control by the warring sides. Thus far, Pakistan has not been the main area of contention in the US-China rivalry. It need not become so, especially if Pakistan and the US take mutually beneficial steps to improve their own bilateral relationship. Prime Minister Imran Khan sends the right signals when he expressed the desire to forge dignified friendship across the board. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you. Very grateful for your very thought-provoking, incisive comments on the subject. So we had a good roundup of the global environment, the challenges and opportunities, and the impact of China's rise at the global level. So let's open the discussion. And my first question is realistic. Let's be realistic. What we have discussed right now in last half an hour, it is an academic discussion. We all know the world we are living in. So we zoom into South Asia. US exited, left Afghanistan. It is not taken well in Washington, and certainly not taken well in New Delhi also. China and Pakistan were on the right side of the history as we see it today. And they were saying since last decade that United States has to find a political solution to the Afghan problem. Now this has happened. Now the government is with Taliban in Kabul. How this scenario in South Asia is going to impact on Pakistan, where it is further complicated that Pakistan is saying that we are the strategic partners of China. We have CPEC in Pakistan, the flagship of BRI. And at the same time, Pakistan is totally dependent on West for its exports, number one, and for financial assistance to run the country. So I would request first Dr. Shabana to briefly comment on this question, that where and how Pakistan is going to find the balance.
As has been pointed out by Alvi Saab, very rightly, there are limits to what a big power can choose. They have the luxury, but I don't feel that they even have a luxury. Circumstances define the course of the nation. And this applies equally to Pakistan and to the bigger power. US always wanted to have its way. Yes, they killed OBL, they made them displaced. Now they're again worried. Why they are worried? They're worried about the instability. They're worried about the elements who are in Afghanistan, that they may not work for them. And the ISIS is a threat all known to us. Everybody knows.
You can feel comfortable looking at me. Let's forget about camera.
Okay, okay. So this is one of the major issues. I think Pakistan is in a very, very constructive position. I won't say dangerous, because we have a room for a creative diplomacy. And Pakistan has facilitated the Afghan peace process as well in a very tense time when the US was not even willing or the other communities were not even willing to take Taliban on board in the dialogue. But the fact is that when you have something on paper, as you have said, but when it comes to the realization, things differ. This is exactly what we are having. Pakistan was viewed as a constructive part of the whole Afghanistan stability paradox. Now that it has turned the other way around. To bail, they are already bailed. They left. The US and the other left. But now how to put up a good face in front of the other mediums, their own public. They're saying what we did was because of they made us did it. So it is Pakistan's fault, others' fault that we have been, they played double in simple word. So this is a sort of the blame game. I think for Pakistan, the opportunity is to be constructively engaged with the present Taliban and the other elements who are in Afghanistan, because we need to remember, and I think we know it very well, the policy circle, that we cannot change our geography. Afghanistan will remain the Pakistan's neighbor, and so does the India, and so does the China. So we should, and Iran, we have to have a balanced and normal relations with all. India, you have the conflictual relations. We have been tied up with India's misdoings in Afghanistan and are bearing the brunt, and even today. How to balance in that game? We need financial assistance from the West, as you have said, but at the same time, we have an opportunity of CPEC. But will this stage of CPEC bail us out? It will not. We have to be patient. We have to prove that we are worth being a part of the CPEC and BRI. There we need to do a homework. And then we also need to have a correct perception management on our part. That is the key. That is what I call as the constructive diplomacy. And to do is one thing and think is the other thing. I think, and I'm 100% confident that Pakistan has been through very hard times. We have gone through the time when Pakistan tested nuclear, and very financial crunch strong was there. We stood up and we survived. Why can't we swim through these difficult waters?
Thank you, Dr. Shabana. But the question I have for Dr. Talat is US is not going to leave China with South Asia in a situation where US has just left Afghanistan and Pakistan is not coming under the desired diplomatic pressure of United States of America. In this environment, in your opinion, how US is going to hurt this region and the impact on Pakistan, because US wants to hurt or take steps against China's growth and control of this region?
So it's very important. There's another angle to look at the US exit from Afghanistan. For example, when I look at US exit from Afghanistan, I think there can be two things. One is change of strategy by Americans in the region. And the second could be a change of heart on the region. So when people say China is rising, so China is definitely rising, and China will be able to call the shots in international arena in times to come. But the US is not nosediving. US is still a power, and it will continue to be a power to reckon with for a long time. So it's a competition. First of all, we need to understand this power paradigm. China is rising, and China is challenging Americans, and Americans are actually struggling to stay in that position. Now, for Pakistan, Pakistan is actually faced, and for a long time now, we are actually faced with the dilemma of balancing. Sometimes it is Saudi Arabia and Iran balancing, sometimes it is US and China balancing, and it's very critical kind of balancing that we have to ensure. So the American interest in this region have not faded or have not ended. And you can see the AUKUS or many other movements by Americans in this region are evidence that they have not left it to the Chinese to do it. Though There is American scholarship who believe that the regional affairs of South Asian regions or any region should be left to the regional players. The regional players are Russia and China at the moment, but Americans are never going to leave it to, because you see after this, you would see in future, in my assessment, India and US alliance getting stronger than before. Because to stay in the region, the US needs India to be a power. Of course, that power can always be in competition with China. So this is going to be a very complex situation. Another assessment of mine is, Dr. Saba is an international relations scholar, and I think the conflict is perpetual part of this international system. It will never end. It will continue. So what to do? I think the best part is that we must play diplomacy well, so that we can guard our interest. For Pakistan, it is time to guard our interest. So we have to keep this fine balance between China and United States. We should not give an impression, or it should not reflect from our action that we are now in one camp. So I don't agree with this theory of joining a camp. No camp. You can keep multilateral relationship. India has a relationship with China. China has a relationship with India. They were continuing a battle in Ladakh, and they were continuing trade also. So we need to get out of this, that we have to join some camp. We have to go somewhere to, I think we should try to create a balance like China, to create an atmosphere of diplomacy where we have interest-based relationship, the way this is with all the countries, and we must safeguard our interest. We should not annoy anybody. We should not annoy Chinese. They are our friends. They are our trusted friends. They have been helping us in difficult times. At the same time, we should not do anything which goes American interest in the region. Of course, we should fight and tell them, look, this is our red lines. These are our problems. These are our vulnerabilities. You please take into account these vulnerabilities also to, when you pursue your interest in the region. But I think it's a difficult time for us in the region. And this is a difficult time for the region also. So I always say international powers have responsibility to be more, humane. It's like Afghanistan. It's a crisis. It's not Taliban. It's this larger foreign population which will suffer because of this egoistic war in Afghanistan. So the bigger powers should leave their ego aside and try to help developing countries and to tackle with the problems they're facing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can answer from another angle to this question if you want.
Sorry, sir, coming towards you, Dr. Shabana has said that there should be constructive diplomacy, and Dr. Talat is also hopeful about the balancing act Pakistan has to somehow find. Sir, the most difficult question is reserved for you, Air Marshal Shahid Alvi, sir. Sir, we always talk about the good relations with China, but there is a growing feeling in Pakistan that China may not be doing enough to help Pakistan when Pakistan is becoming a punching bag by United States and also by the aggressive adverse diplomacy of India against Pakistan. There is a feeling that China may not be doing enough. We are exporting everything from China, and we are not finding market for our products in China. So do you agree with this opinion, and what do you have to say about it? Is China doing enough?
Okay, but before that, a word about your last question. I think when we talk of US X role in Afghanistan or their future role in Afghanistan, we always paint it in just a black and white situation, and we tend to think that perhaps USA is so angry that she will take some kind of a revenge. I don't think the situation in this manner. First of all, we should know that all our export to the Western countries or to the US, they follow a certain type of, they are under the GATT agreements and many other trade agreements. So unilaterally, they just cannot be, scrapped off just like that. So many people tend to think, what will happen to our 7 billion textile exports? These agreements, you just can't finish them just like that. That sends a very wrong signals of reviving a Cold War. And Europe doesn't want to give this kind of a signal to the China. So, and secondly, you also know that our military dependence on Western sources has reduced considerably. So I think there is no immediate danger. And then the bipartisan approach in USA towards Afghanistan is a long-term stabilization, not inducing a new kind of a problem or war there. At least this is what they are thinking at the moment. And there is a McCain report which says that what USA can do to offset the influence of China. And interestingly, it suggests just the good things that America, like China, should start infrastructural reforms in other countries. They should ask their multinationals to give more generous funds to those countries. So these are the kind of suggestions that now they are floating to their government. Okay, now coming back to your so-called difficult and very difficult question, that what China is not doing. I don't think so. I think China is doing what no one else has done so far. First of all, you just cannot expect that if your products are, cannot compete on the basis of their price or their quality, they should still be accepted by a benevolent power. I mean, that's not the rules of the game. It will not happen. And so we should not expect in such terms. In terms of exporting some raw material to China, well, I think whatever we can export or whatever China needs, we are already doing that. Dr. Talat would know a lot about these terms. What we should ask, in fact, China, what's our genuine demand is the quick realization of special economic zone. I have been saying that since 2014. And I remember I organized one such meeting and we called secretary also. And we wanted to know the progress on these special economic zones. So Dr. Tarat would bear me that when these special economic zones would realize, I think then the true manifestation of our trade with either China or with outside world will start to take place. But I'll say what China is doing so far. I have been going to China since 1989 until recently. Some of my stays were for months. Nobody else has done that so far as a true friend. So I think if there are complaints by a section of society, it's mostly based on lack of information. That's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the three experts, esteemed experts, are agreeing on one point, that Pakistan has to strike balance between United States and China, and Pakistan has to appreciate what China has done up till now. But the question I'm going to persist on my line. We say, as Air Marshal Shahid Alvi has just said, that we should realize the special economic zones. Special economic zones are basically for relocation of export-based industry from various parts of the world. Primarily, the expectation is from China and from Europe. Now, when we are under FATF, we have a longer list of checks for an investor who is going to bring in money inside Pakistan. That is something which is dividing, or it is basically repelling all the business houses, corporates globally to invest into Pakistan, because they do not want that their checklist already they have on their financial transactions increase by 10, 15 points more. So when the US-China competition and US-Pakistan relations, they are creating this environment adverse for investment inside Pakistan? How can we expect people to come into our SEZs, Dr. Shavana?
You have asked a very economic point of view, really, and I'm a political scientist and a strategic studies person. Well, it comes within the geoeconomics and a fusion of geopolitics as well. The fact of the matter is that FATF is one of the Western instrumental project that is not new. It has a history to it, and it is about, I think, more than a decade and a half old, and maybe less than that. And they have spotlighted the areas where the other states, including Pakistan, are weak on instrumentalizing the balanced or the clean behavior. Now, unfortunately, Pakistan has been tagged into that because of the global politics and the considerations of our so-called friends that have really blacklisted Pakistan. As we all know that Pakistan is on the gray list, and only 2 more points are left to come out of that. When that we were hoping this year, but it has not materialized, another 12 weeks more to go for the review. Having said this, the point for the layman is simply, I will ask you a counter question. Why we were not prepared to deal with such banning Western-based instrumentalization? This is a very critical question for a layman like me. We have been, the day the Pakistan was born, after 1948, we have chained ourselves to the Western economy into Pakistan, whether through regular trade, through imports, exports, loans, investments, and so on and so forth. So why we missed this proactive thinking on that ground? When answer can be, it came from the other side. Well, if it came from the other side, I think the lesson to draw is we have to be prepared. We have to have a futuristic thinking. And as a medium-sized state, we cannot afford to lose the sight of such penalties or coercive economic infrastructure that comes into place from time to time. So my simple answer is that instead of blaming others, we should do our own introspection and keeping in mind the other motives that are working against you.
I just wrote word introspection to actually stress my point. I think when we talk of SEZs, the way Marshall Saab has said, we need to first of all do introspection. You see, a special economic zone to me, a person who is studying it very closely, should have started in 2018 because it was part of the second phase of CPEC. We started in 2019. So we don't carry out introspection. Why we have failed? Why are not we doing it? Are we leaving everything for China to do, or what? You just see a model. For example, Chinese have told us to have a G2G model, government to government model. You have B2B model. Now they have come up with the T2T model, think tank to think, like they decentralize every concept so that people who are actually expert on those areas should interact with each other and come up with solutions. When you look at the first SEZ being established in Pakistan, that is Rashakai. So there's only one company, as my information may be wrong. It should be wrong. My information should be wrong because my information is that there's only one Chinese company in Rashakai investing. There are a couple of investors who are talking about it, but they're not coming up with investments. So why we have not been able to do it? First is introspection. Second is course correction. For example, if you want to create enabling environment, have you created an enabling environment for investors to come to Pakistan? No. Have you been able to create one window operation that you boast about everywhere, that we will create one window operation and everybody? Have we created any facilitation mechanism for the investors in Pakistan? No. Have we incentivized our own investors, Pakistani investors, Pakistani, businessmen, business community, or Pakistani industrialists to come and invest in the SEZ? No, there's no mechanism prepared. So I think there's a lot to do on how we will do it on ground. For example, when you go to China, you ask them, what is your what comes to your mind when you talk of a special economic zone? So they'll tell you what is in their mind. They say you have a 1,000 canals of land, you have a road, you have a electricity, you have community facilitation like hospitals, schools. There's a whole list of things that you need to do in a special economic zone before you ask industrialist, trader, or a manufacturer to come and do your work here. So have we done that? You start, if you ground break today, Rashaki, you'll take 10 more years to prepare it the way I'm telling you what a special economic zone look like. So there's a lot to be done on part of, I think, policymakers and implementers in Pakistan. It's not China. When I go to China, I ask, why are you not investing in our country? They say we are pushing investors in Pakistan, but you are pushing them back to our country because you have not created enabling environment in your country. You have not been able to facilitate investors. So a person who has earned money, you have to know that rich people in China are market oriented. They're capitalist in their mindset. They would just come and invest money if they have a hope that they will have opportunity to earn money from it. They want to be a very secure investment mechanism here. So there's a lot to be done on SEZ before it comes to be a success story in our country. And I think we should wake up to the fact that it's not going to happen. It's not going to be somebody coming and just building it up for us in Pakistan. I think we need to move fast on this. And unless the only thing why I give a lot of importance to SEZ in our country, because it is the SEZ who would create employment in this country. It is SEZ who has, whatever you expect from CPEC, it is SEZ which will fulfill our dreams about CPEC. Unless you do that, unless you create that industrial revolution in your country, I don't think so CPEC will be any success story, because these roads, these energy, everything, all other components you see, they're all linked to something produced in Pakistan to be exported elsewhere in the world and earn revenue. It revolves around it.
Thank you, Dr. Talat. Sir, coming towards Air Marshal Shahid Alvi. Sir, do you think that the US-China rivalry is going to impact us more, or it is about our internal inefficiencies in handling from diplomacy to infrastructure development and economics? Which is the more heavier factor, which is basically is an impediment in our growth?
Well, I think rivalry will only impact us if we are internally weak. That's the point. So, unfortunately, we are no more a nation that can be called a hardworking nation. Dr. Talat has, very correctly pointed out the problems in CPEC. And this is our problem, actually. If we do our homework, like you said, if we make proactive policies in every sphere, whether it is political, whether it is, military, whether it is internal security or external aggression, if we do our homework, if we are prepared, then perhaps these external shocks that can emanate from their rivalry would have much lessening effect on us. So these two things are interlinked. You can't say that this rivalry will affect us or not. Rivalry is surely going to affect us if we allow it to affect us. How to reduce this effect? We have to think of it now and think seriously. And then take actions. And believe me, one of my friends who was industrialist, he wanted me to have some information about special economic zone. Despite my position, I could not give him answer. Trying to ring left and right, couldn't get to any conclusion. So if the people at my stage can't get to those conclusions, then how just a simple businessman would be able to entice his counterpart from China and produce those enabling environment in SCZ which can make the thing work. I'm giving you this example to answer your question that our homeworks in different fields are not done, unfortunately. So that's why we
Thank you very much, sir.
More.
Thank you, sir. So now coming towards the conclusion of our discussion, I can very fairly and very accurately say that there is a unanimity amongst our experts about three things. One, Pakistan has to come out of a psychology where we are constantly blaming the external factors, the US-China rivalry or difficulties in Pak-US relations, which are going to impact the growth of Pakistan and Pak-China, the realization of the Pak-China strategic partnership in terms of economics and trade. We have to find the right mix in our diplomacy, as has been highlighted by Dr. Shabana, the constructive diplomacy where we must be well aware of our geography, which cannot be changed, and we must be quite realistic about balancing our diplomacy, maintaining within the global environment we live in. The second aspect is to strike the balance between the two powers, which have a lot of influence inside Pakistan, the United States and the China, as has been highlighted and amply explained by Dr. Talat Shabir. And the third point, which has been very accurately described by Air Marshal Shahid Alvi, the enabling environment to be created. If I translate that, realistically, it says that put your own house in order and then expect others to come and assist you, support you, and be cooperative. So with these concluding remarks, I thank all my experts, Dr. Shabana, Dr. Talat, and Air Marshal Shahid Alvi. And we hope that we have been able to give some insight into the subject of how the South Asia or Pakistan are going to be impacted because of US-China rivalry or the growing China at the global level. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
CPSD is pleased to bring you yet another thought-provoking and enthralling webinar focused on China's rise and its impact in South Asia and the international arena. Over the last 2 decades, China has regained much of its influence in the world, as Beijing is making progress towards its dream of restoring what it sees as its rightful great power status through the mechanisms of global governance. The primary goal of global governance is to provide global public goods, particularly peace and security, justice, and mediation systems for conflict, functioning markets, and unified standards for trade and industry.